Everybody, thanks so much for being here today. For those of you who may be new to the museum or your first visit, my name is Paul Loya. I'm the Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Collections here at the museum, and I helped bring together this exhibition, Shared Realities. It's quite an honor today to sit amongst these individuals here who really were the visionaries in the late 1970s, 1980s that helped bring LBMA video to the forefront and really bring it to life. Collaborated, worked here. Kathy Ray Huffman was the chief curator here from 1979 until 1984. And really, this show, this cable access series, Shared Realities, was kind of her brainchild and helped. Stuart Bender was one of the editors and collaborators on the work. Nancy Buchanan, again, another collaborator, and we're going to go through all of your CVs because you guys have quite an enclave there. And Anna Bukowski here today, who's a PhD, who's doing her dissertation on public access. So, in 2024, LBMA celebrates its 50-year anniversary of the inception of the video program started here in 1974. The Long Beach Museum of Art was one of the first institutions on the West Coast to support the medium of video and provide a platform to exhibit and support the artists. The founders of the program, then Director Jan Edelman and Deputy Director David Ross, didn't see video as a tool to document or as an educational component for the museum, but focused on the aesthetics as a medium. They sought to build a program that would support the artists working in the medium itself. Ross envisioned a post-production facility for the artists to edit their work, as well as involve cable broadcasting in the new media artist building for the museum to be built downtown. After the indefinite postponement of the IMPA building and departure of Edelman and Ross, the vision and support for video carried on with the support of such visionaries as curator Nancy Drew and her curatorial assistant at the time, Kathy Ray Huffman. From 1978 to 1995, the LBMA video program became one of the key cornerstones of the video medium due to the consistent and commitment to the support of the artists working in the medium. Providing post-production facilities, filming and editing equipment, residencies, and exhibition space. The video archive that LBMA amassed over its 30-year existence and spans over 5,000 videotapes became a vital resource for artists, educators, and museums. In 2006, the Getty Research Institute took archival duties of the video library, including each video and the ephemera from the video program. We want to thank the GRI for all the help in the past 2 decades digitizing the work and care for the archive. This show would not be possible without their support. I want to welcome Stuart Bender. Stuart Bender is a multimedia artist and has been exhibiting his work, since 1982, 83? 81? Sorry, it wasn't really clear on the site. Stuart was hired here in LBMA in 1980 as a CETA position. Can you explain what the CETA position was? CETA?
When I moved to Long Beach, I ended up getting a job as an artist in residence with the city for a couple of years, and 78. In a show we were doing in 1980, Kathy came to the show, the exhibition. I was a city artist in residence. That's the CETA program you're referring to. And she was just asking around, does anybody know any artists that did media work? And I had happened to have done 2 years of radio broadcasting. I did one of the earliest gay radio shows in Albuquerque, New Mexico, reaching the entire state. And so someone said, ask Stuart, because he did radio, and that's how I ended up getting hired at the museum.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. He worked on numerous projects, such as one of the first in 3060 TV art, as well as The Gap, done by Jaime Davidich and Joseph Leonardi. Both are featured in Shared Realities, among many others. In 1990, Bender and partner Angelo Funicelli showcased the video opera Seven Prophecies here at LBMA, put together by curator Michael Nash. Bender has been exhibited domestically, internationally in Brazil, France, Finland, Australia, New Zealand, Spain, and Switzerland. Nancy Buchanan received her BA and MFA from UCI. She was part of the first graduate classes at the UCI alongside Chris Burden, Jean St. Pierre. She was a founding member of the F-Space Gallery in Costa Mesa, the Women's Building in downtown LA, the Grandview Gallery, and Double XX. Nancy Buchanan has been involved in numerous artist groups, including Los Angeles Women's Building, Los Angeles Contemporary Art Exhibitions. She has also acted as a curator for several exhibitions and projects. Her work has been seen domestically and internationally, and she is a recipient of 4 National Endowment of the Arts Individual Artist Grants, a COLA Grant, and Rockefeller Fellowship. Over several decades, Buchanan has been an influential faculty member in the program in film video at CalArts. From 1980 to 1983, Buchanan lectured part-time at several Southern California universities, including UCLA, University of California, San Diego, California State University, Long Beach, California State University, Dominguez Hills, and Otis Art Institute. She has also served as faculty member for the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Art from 1981 to 1983, and as an adjunct faculty member with the Vermont College of Arts with the Otis Art Institute Social Practice Program from 2014 to 2018. Kathy Ray Huffman is a curator, writer, producer, researcher, lecturer, and expert for video and media art. Huffman is a graduate from Cal State Long Beach in exhibition design and a second major in radio, film, and television, and began her career here at LBMA in 1977. Brought on as an intern by the deputy director David Ross, she helped develop the video program into one of the country's leading video platforms. She was appointed chief curator here at the museum in 1979 and helped to develop and fundraise to build the Annex Post production studio at the police station in Belmont Shore and to become LBMA as an arts media center. Her vision and support for the medium helped many artists see their visions realized and brought into production. She moved from LBMA in 1984 to ICA Boston until 1991. From 1991 until 2014, Huffman was based in Europe and embraced early net art and interactive online environments. In 2016, she came back to LBMA to curate LBMA's Pacific Standard Time exhibition. Was that 2011? Oh, sorry. Sorry. Exchange and Evolution and a worldwide video exhibition 1974 to 1999. Together with Nancy, yes. Yeah. And Howe Bukowski is conducting their PhD dissertation at USC on the relationships between public access television, artists' use of broadcast technologies, critical infrastructure studies, and queer media production, all with an emphasis upon the regional context of Los Angeles. Their work draws on archival theory, cultural studies, methodologies, notions of format and materiality, and oral history. Their research in LBMA Video's cable access program led to the digitization of the cable access series Shade Realities episodes, as well as her essay on Kit Galloway and Sherry Robinowitz's Hole in Space was a key tool for this exhibition. Bukowski received an MA in art history from McGill University, where their Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Canada supported a thesis work focused on the role of karaoke and amateur singing in contemporary art. They additionally hold a BA in art history and media studies from the University of Toronto. In 2022, Bukowski was awarded a top student in communication history division at the International Communication Association. All right, done with the intros. So, welcome everybody. It's great to have you all. How are you today? Good. The first question I have for you today is, the use of film was used by artists back to Duchamp and the Dadaists and the Surrealists. Warhol used his motion camera to make his film Sleep, Empire, and capture his screen test. And there was use of video felt amongst, early practitioners of art. But it really wasn't until the late 1960s and the early 1970s that video really starts to make traction. And it's also the development of video that kind of projects, brings video to the forefront and creates a movement. Each of you are participating in what would be the cornerstones of the foundation of West Coast video. Maybe you could each speak on how did you each come to video as a medium and decide to invest yourself that it would be the artistic vehicle to guide your visions.
When I was living in Laguna Beach, my studio was just down the road from the Public Access Corporation. And at that time, I had been doing performances. And so I thought, I can just go next door and borrow equipment and document my performances. And what I found was that shooting a camera at the kind of performance that I was doing was like shooting it with a gun. It was just like dead. It was horrible. But it seemed like this was a new window for me to use to reach more people and to make a different kind of performance.
Kathy?
As you said in your introduction, I did a double MFA program, and well, you have to do a second major in MFA. So I took radio and television, and part of that did an internship. So you had 2 internships, one for the one part. So I did it at the local cable station here in Long Beach, and that would have been in 1979, I guess. And you know, I really hated it. It was really difficult. You had these guys in there. I was the only woman in the mix, and they just sort of pushed you there and sit there and do this. And I said, there has to be a better way. And so I decided I would need to meet an artist, and I needed space. And so I joined the Museum Studies program at Cal State Long Beach. I mean, I went there and I said, I'd like to join. And they said, well, you have to make a proposal, which I did. And during that process, I eventually was introduced by David Ross to Bill Viola, who came and was doing a program here at the museum. And I talked to him and said, well, we have this coming up at the museum, at the university, Long Beach State. And would you be interested to come and do a project? No, I don't know. It takes so much money. We didn't have any money, but eventually we worked it out.
When I was around 6 years old, growing up in New York, there was a show called $1 Million Movie. And they would show the same movie every day at 3 o'clock, and twice on Saturday and twice on Sunday. And there was a very limited amount of content that they could show, so a lot of stuff was repeated. And one of them was Plan 9 from Outer Space, if you're familiar with the movie, which is considered one of the worst movies ever made. And as a 6-year-old, I looked at it and thought to myself, if someone could make the effort to get this movie made and actually shown on television for people to see it, anybody can. And that was sort of like my start of motivation of knowing that that was going to be somehow my life's work. As I mentioned earlier, when I got to Albuquerque, I had the opportunity to do radio programming, and I also did a lot of experimentation with audio and sound, and spent hours cutting literally with a razor blade and marker pen doing experiments. When I finally came to the museum, when Kathy found me and offered me the job here, all of a sudden, I didn't just have sound to play with anymore, but I had images and movement to work with. And I realized this was it. I was hooked for life. This was going to be my calling.
And Anna, how did you get to, how did you decide that this would be your, talk about public access and cable would be your dissertation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I was thinking about just in terms of even my own introduction to video and the entwinement of TV and video. That was sort of the start for me. Seeing like William Wegman clips on or segments on Sesame Street. My aunt bought me a VHS of a William Wegman compilation. It was Alphabet Soup when I was a child, and I would watch it until I think the tape, fell apart. So I've always had a long interest in art and TV, and I was starting my dissertation, my doctoral work at USC in the communication department, backgrounds in art history, and I made a switch to communication after being out of school for several years. And I was doing a program with Suzanne Lacey through the MFA program where we taught an after-school art and design class with a local high school, and it was great. And I was talking to Suzanne about, I'm interested in video, I'm interested in TV, I'm interested in sort of local media, amateur media, and she said, oh, why don't you check out the Long Beach program, because that's kind of the crux of what they were doing there, and that was my entry point to this work. And also being a student in LA, why not study the place that you're in and engage yourself with those histories? So it's been a wonderful experience.
Just going through the history of the museum and just, reading through each one of your your resumes and what you all contributed to. It's, I know, Nancy, could you talk about F-Space a little bit and what you were doing there? And I think that's really important. And even like because the museum I did a show for this exhibition at our downtown space of an exhibition about New Space Gallery, and it was with Jean St. Pierre in that first graduate program. And can you kind of talk about maybe how that group kind of came together and what the interest was and the catalyst for studying video? I mean, and maybe preface that, like you had that first graduate class, you had Chris Burden a part of that, Paul McCarthy, correct? And then Jean St. Pierre, Jay McCafferty.
Well, I think McCafferty came later.
Okay.
I mean, the first class at Irvine was really small. There were just 12 people.
Okay.
And we were all very, very different. In fact, there was one student who was older, and he was a ceramist, Larry Shep. And there used to be a sculpture Larry grounds. I don't know if it's still here, but Larry made these like ceramic eggs, and the glaze was inside, and so it oozed out when it was fired, and they were just wonderful. They were just these big globular things, and I don't know. You should find out if it's still here. But Irvine did have some video equipment, but I don't really think any of us were using it at that time.
Okay.
Later on, Chris did some things with video, and he famously bought time on television to air one of his performances, Through the Night Softly. His idea was that he wanted it to look like he was flying through a field of stars. And what he did was he broke a bunch of safety glass in a parking lot. And then he put his hands behind his back. He was wearing a Speedo bathing suit, and he crawled through the glass. It was really quite horrible to watch it in person. But then he bought time on channel 13, I think. And so his friends stayed up, and we watched a bad movie, and then we saw Through the Night Softly with Chris Burden.
Wow.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I was here a student at Cal State Long Beach, and this was another era where we didn't have all of this instant communication. So I knew nothing about the program at Irvine or F-Space, and we were in a supposedly very forward-thinking arts program. So it was only much later that I found it. But we were all in sort of our pockets at that time. Just
No, interesting. I mean, that kind of goes into my next question about, that if you could recall, a specific technological development, an exhibition, or a particular artist work that you felt like propelled the video medium forward, that kind of brought it to the forefront, or like you're saying, like maybe something that was broke out of your pocket, and kind of informed you about what was happening in the video community.
a lot of that depended on advances in the technology
Sure.
and what was available for artists to get their hands on. At first it was just the reel-to-reel, and then all of a sudden there could be a portable color. We had some kind of Hitachi color difference because all of a sudden things had to be lit properly. You know, it made a different production scene, but it gave a better idea. And then advances in sound work and things like that. And of course, we all were aware of certain things like the Namjoon Paik was here, and he was using the picture phone performance centers, and that was a big new thing that we just were amazed at the time.
I think editing was the singular advance that really made everything go forward, because initially it was really difficult to edit. Mm-hmm. You know, people cut like Stuart was describing, and then you had crash editing where you had to watch to see, okay, here, and then punch two buttons at the same time. And maybe you didn't get it on the right frame, and if you didn't, then you had a big black hook in the video.
Wow.
So good editing equipment was it. And in the museum, initially, Peter Kirby, who has always been a great supporter of video artists, was up in the attic, and he had a really primitive system. He used to edit for artists.
Yeah.
We had a 1/2-inch system and a 3/4-inch system. And then we worked really, really hard to impress the Rockefeller Foundation to give us a grant big enough to have 1-inch AB rolls so that we could do fades and different kinds of things. You could speak more to that because I was sitting in an office. These guys were in the studio.
There was a nice progression of the quality of equipment that we had coming in here. If you don't know the difference, we were primarily at that time doing 3/4-inch, which was being called comparable to 16 millimeter film, as opposed to 35 millimeter, which would have been the professional cinematic format. That would have been equitable to 1-inch. However, 3/4-inch was perfectly fine for broadcasting. Just in terms of technology, though, I thought of kind of going off into a slightly different tangent of what I considered really one of the major changes, especially significant today, is not just the opportunity of this kind of equipment, but what Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz did, which was to get satellite time to connect Century City with Lincoln Center. I think it was Lincoln Center, with no publicity. Now imagine this is 1980. This to me was like Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic. 1980, no publicity, 2 hours a night, giant screen in Century City, another giant screen in Lincoln Center, and people would just walk by and stop and see people on the screen, life-size, and realize they could talk to each other and interact with each other. By the third night, this was on every newscast. People were coming, crowding to meet each other, to see relatives that they hadn't seen in years. And you gotta remember, at this time, picture phone like they had in 1968 in 2001 Space Odyssey was a dream, all right? And here it was, these artists getting access to satellites to do this unpublicized thing that became phenomenal. To me, that was sort of like an inspiration into a completely new world of technology and of connection that didn't exist before.
It was their requirement that there was no publicity. They forbade us to do a press release. So the museum became the fiscal sponsor because they raised the money and we were the nonprofit that they could funnel it through. And this was a hard sell to the museum to say, yes, we're going to do this big project, but we can't tell anybody beforehand. You can imagine the kind of negotiations that had to go on behind closed doors for that. And the other thing was that on the end of the third night, if you remember, were you there? The pile of trash was beyond belief, and we had no preparation to know how many trash bags we would need to take care of all of this trash, the signs and the everything that people left behind. That was a big thing.
I mean, even if you have a chance, the Hole in Space is on display in the second gallery here. You can see it there, which I felt was very important to show in this exhibition, and display it the way I believe you showed it. Like what you wrote, you showed it like a half hour after it was done editing, or
they did the piece, and then we turned the video studio over to them, and they edited all the footage that they had. They had to wait until they got the tapes. There was no internet, so the tapes had to actually be mailed from New York to Long Beach, and they gathered everything together. I think it was Sherry's family that lived here in Long Beach, which gave them a good base to work from when they were editing. So they edited their video, and we also had a lot of photography that had been taken documenting it. We had those images blown up, and it was in the two galleries in the museum at the time, which is across the lawn.
yeah.
and the video that they edited, which is what you see in there. They did that tape in our video studio.
Amazing, amazing. Anna, is there a moment that you see?
I think less so than a specific like moment or development that I see is that all of this really speaks to the labor-intensive nature of making video, right? It's a practice that really requires not only, advancements in aesthetics and style and tone and whatever you're, making content out of, but how you make it. And when video equipment is expensive, it's heavy, it's changing. What the museum did to have open the studio and fund the studio and open it up to artists was, to me, that is in some ways more important than any singular development, because it meant that artists could actually make work. Cameras are prohibitively expensive for most artists. I know Nancy, for example, and Paul McCarthy bought equipment together and would loan it out. I mean, it is a very much a community medium, and I think that what the museum did was so singular, but that's also the reason why the work here is so important and critical.
Yeah, and that kind of brings my second point to that question. Yeah, how did your vision and David Ross's vision of having a post-production studio come to be, and how you saw that as such an important asset to the museum and for the community of video?
The initial concept that was, I guess it was in the early 70s, when David and Jan Ulleman were here, was to actually have a cable station in the museum. So it wasn't so much about offering facilities to artists, although he did that and he did have equipment, but the concept was that the museum would be a cultural hub and that the community would, buy into that somehow. That went by the by when the whole city financial structure collapsed, and they both left because in opposition to what had happened. I mean, their plan was nixed. We just picked up the pieces and put together the equipment that was left and just opened it up for whoever needed it. And it was always quite an open situation. Our favorite word was yes.
But there were charges.
If somebody had a grant, they paid, but most of it was for free.
I did a project in 1988 after I went to Namibia to edit the video I shot there.
Okay.
And I paid by the hour, and I traded editing time.
Okay.
I edited for other customers.
The idea was that the studio would pay for itself. I don't think that we ever refused anybody access. That's what I'm trying to say. It wasn't like, come on, it's all free. But if somebody needed it and had a project, we would listen to them. I don't think it was ever no. I mean.
If I can add to that, you have to understand that at this time in history, there was no other kind of access. We're talking about studio equipment that would have cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars an hour to get access to, and now artists were being able to get access to something. There was no other way to do this before the advent of public access television and that whole era of loaning out equipment. This was the only way it could have been done.
Yeah. And speaking of that, reading through the essays and interviews about the early days of LBMA video and the collaboration, the constant collaboration between artists, curators, and museums, I think played a vital role in the growth of video. Nancy, you're working at the Women's Building and F Space, and Stuart, you two both collaborated on works many of times. Can you speak to maybe the collaborative nature of video at that time, and how collaboration helped grow the video medium?
I would also say that institutionally, we collaborated with other institutions. Sure. I mean, I was quite frequently loading equipment in the trunk of my car and driving it to Cal Arts. We had Tri-Standard. At that time, it was not digital, so we had NTSC and we had PAL. And so I invested in a Tri-Standard deck so that we could have an international program. And often we loaned that. We took monitor decks to the Women's Building. There were many different places that borrowed equipment from us for one night or a couple of nights.
I'd just like to add my perception of what was going on at the time, which was also having come from an art background, drawing and painting and doing kind of very isolated work. There was a community sense and a sense of generosity that did not exist, I think, in any other art form. The one thing I remember most of all is how incredibly generous other artists were to other artists, to me, and in turn allowed me to give as much as I could back to other artists as well. And that, when you talk about community, there was that real sense at the time that we were kind of dependent on each other, and it was a great spirit.
Yeah, and I think you see that too in the from the Halloween party from the Haunted Woman house. You know, you watch that video and it's just, I mean, you know, in one of your essays, Kathy, you speak about how just the nature of the museum changes, you know, after Alleman and Ross leave, and it becomes like this elitist sensibility kind of leaves. It becomes more community activated. And I mean, maybe you could speak on that, because you do feel that watching that video, just this kind of community coming together and celebrating video. And yeah,
Right. Well, that particular event was toward the end of the exhibition at home, which was a 10-year anniversary of the Women's Building. And the exhibition was curated by Arlene Raven, who unfortunately is no longer with us. We also did a number of events, and one of them is what I really pushed very hard, and it was a lot of fun, was we had it on Halloween night. We had the Haunted Woman House, and artists were invited to come and do performances, set up installations on the grounds. It was a warm autumn night. The cable company actually came with their cable truck and pulled it up in the parking lot, and that was the Scare the Camera contest. And that contest was won by Anne Bray, who I only found that out last year. She won the contest. Bill Viola was a bartender in the middle of the grounds. And the electricity went off every 20 minutes because we overloaded the circuits. There were so many video monitors and things hooked up to it. That was it. I forgot the question now, but that was a lot of different groups coming together who were not really affiliated with the museum, but when everybody sort of knew each other in this larger regional community. We had published a large poster, and many galleries and art spaces did exhibitions by women. It's kind of a model for the PST now, you know, because we set the theme and everybody jumped in, and it was a really great idea. I don't know if any of those posters exist here.
there's one right here. That one?
Yes, there it is, right there. You can see it. So that was a big job coordinating all of that, I have to say. But yeah,
It's fun. Yeah, it's wonderful to have documentation of that and see that and kind of feel that. So yeah.
Well, also, I think that schools were very important in the early days, because there were more and more universities that were getting their own equipment, and then you know, there was a kind of a network that would circulate among, you know, like USC and UCLA and
Otis
Art Institute. All of those
Cal
places
Arts,
were
yeah.
very key in developing video. And then, of course, the cable access system was used by a lot of artists in the very, very early days. Ulysses Jenkins was using cable access equipment in the beginning of his career.
John Doerr had established EZTV.
Yeah.
It was out of Hollywood, and now it's moved more to Santa Monica. They have a big archive of early works by artists, performance artists especially.
And I think also just as a series, Shared Realities, one thing it does in addition to the variety of things that it includes that it also, I think, speaks on like a meta level to all of this collaboration and all these relationships because of the breadth of segments that it features, the artists that it features. It features interviews that happen in the studio, so that's featured in there. Stuart's video of the Chili festivals playing here. So we have this idea of like what's happening sort of in relationship to a greater cultural scene in Long Beach. And I think just as an actual cultural product, beyond what it actually shows on screen, there's like all these interesting relationships that are categorized in there. And speaking also, what you're mentioning about artists using cable stations themselves, like the museum went on in 1985 to have this, I think, 10-year-long grant program called Open Channels, where it was a jury system, but at 5 years, every year, 5 artists would have, or maybe quarterly, would have access to public access studios to make their work, and then it was shown on air. So there was this sort of collaborative spirit between not only arts institutions, but arts and telecommunications institutions.
And Shared Realities wasn't the first cable series that we did. We started back in 1979. We took a program from the kitchen in New York called Made for TV. And that was a really exciting beginning for us to actually do. So it required, we did it with 3 different cable systems, and it was called bicycling, although no bicycles were involved. And it meant getting the tape in your hand, going in your car, driving it to Long Beach, going there the next day, getting the tape, taking it to Santa Monica, going back there the next day, and then driving it to Santa Barbara, and then going back the next day. That's a long drive, and coming back. And that was the circuit, so it was like a way to get the word out to different places. Yeah. We never knew how many people ever watched the cable programs, by the way. There were no statistics on who watched the cable access.
And how did people know where to watch them? Like, how did you get the word out?
We had our publicity, which we told them how to do it in Long Beach. Every place we couldn't do it for everybody, but
Well, the cable companies usually have one channel that had the schedule, so you could just tune that in and watch it. And speaking about the Access program, Paul McCarthy got one of the awards to make video at a cable company, and he asked me to help him. So the first day we went in and he built a house, and the cable company guy said, "Oh, this is so nice. Maybe we can use this later for one of our shows." And after Paul was done with his mayonnaise and ketchup and a number of other things, they really couldn't wait to get us out of there.
What did it smell like in there?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. And speaking of the community in the cable television, Kathy, can you speak about the vision that you had of community access and LBMA video and why cable television was so important to embrace?
Cable television was a kind of stand-in for television, and artists were making video. And at the time, we used the word video and television interchangeably. We called works for TV, or we did we didn't among ourselves. We didn't distinguish between TV technology and video technology. It was the same technology, and artists wanted to be on TV. There was it was the thing that was the main mass medium in the world, actually. There was no internet, there was no cell phones, there was no email, there was not even fax machines then. So they were just starting in the early 80s. But it was the thing. It was the thing that made the biggest impression on culture. And it was the thing that created language system, slang and style and everything. So it was what artists were interested to interfere with and to jump in and make some noise. And we supported what artists wanted to do.
Yeah, because I think about it as like you have video and then you have, like why not just leave it inside the museum walls? Why does it need to go, to public access and broadcast? I think that's an interesting part
conceptually,
about it.
that was a great idea.
Right.
We just didn't know who was watching it, and
Right.
So we hoped, we thought it was everywhere, but we don't know.
Yeah, and I mean that's why I chose shared realities to show. It was like it went beyond the museum
Right.
walls, and I love the fact
Right.
that you took video art and then put it into people's homes directly. And I thought that was very forward thinking.
Well, also the interviews contextualized it so that if it was new to a viewer, at least if they watched the whole show, they'd have some background,
Right.
you know, they'd have a discussion.
Right.
And I think that's right, because before that, we would just have a series of artworks, and they would be one artist's piece, and then that would be it. So this was because of the guys and girls at the studio who actually came up with the format and, you know, got us in there, had us put makeup on, had us sit with bright lights in our face, and made us talk to each other. And then they put bits, you know, you guys really created that opportunity. We would not have been able to do it without you, because it was your vision to make these interviews the way they were, you know. Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, and Nancy and Stuart, like, how did you see public access and cable broadcast as part of your practice?
Well, like I said, I started out using, you know, the public access equipment. And then I got an Artists and Communities grant in 1986. And so I was in residence at the Pasadena Community Access Center, and I did workshops. And actually one of my students is here, Marcia Alexander, who now, you know, has done a lot of her own video. And that was a lot of fun to work with different groups. I mean, most of my classes were pretty straight, except for one that was about doing artwork.
Right.
And it was really great to have a 3-camera studio, because you could kind of edit as you went along. Things were done. And then when I finished the residency, Michael Zinsen, who was a community activist in Pasadena, came in and said he wanted to do a show. And I said, oh, good, I want to help you. And so I ended up working with Michael for 10 years on his show that was called Message to the Grassroots. And coming from the African American community, all of the shows dealt with issues that were important to that neighborhood. Michael was particularly concerned with police abuse. He had been blinded in one eye by a confrontation with police when he was witnessing police abuse. And so several shows dealt with that. And I wound up actually going to Namibia in Africa to document their independence, thanks to my relationship with Michael and the work that he was doing.
Well, after I left the Long Beach Museum, I ended up running public access at 2 places in Pasadena, and also in for Group W, Westinghouse Cable, which covered 3 cities in South Bay, LA. And we offered free training, free classes, free editing classes, and free equipment access to anyone that wanted to come in and train to do video. And also, because of my relationship with other artists, I brought in a lot of artists to come in and also have access to the studios to do anything that they basically needed or wanted to do. And I had the opportunity to put together basically thoroughly professional television studios that could cover any kind of program or video that anyone want to do, plus go outside and also shoot remotely as well, and then come in and edit.
And Anna, how do you see LBMA cable broadcasting as a vital resource to artists during that time and for the future of public access?
I mean, yeah, I think that Nancy and Stuart and Kathy have all spoken to how critical of a resource this was for not only artists, but for growing and sort of maintaining an arts community. I mean, I think that we can only think about artistic scenes or communities in terms of the work that's being produced, but the question of how. And I think also another thing is that thinking about the role of Long Beach locally, it expands our idea of where LA arts existed, it expands the map. Long Beach is not often part of the conversation about the central locations of LA arts and media, which is, you know, it's not Venice, it's not downtown, it's not Cal Arts, it's Long Beach, which is not LA. So I think it's also very interesting to think the way the role that this, you know, local space played in the growing of a regional, you know, one of the most important regions for video production in history, but certainly in the 70s and the 80s. And Long Beach was important not only because it was showing work, but it was because it was an incubator for the making of work and really foundational work such as Hole in Space or cable systems. And I think that not only on like the conceptual level of how they're thinking about cable, this is a way that we can put work, you know, beyond the walls of the museum. We can change the definition of the museum, the orientation of the museum, but it also was this great way to bring more artists in and resource them with the equipment to make what they wanted to make.
I have to say that, you know, creating these programs and series was like a layer on top of already doing the regular program and the grant writing and everything else. And so we didn't do so many cable series because it was a hell of a lot of work. And, you know, it was like Kira and I in a very small office, and we just worked day and night practically. It was a terrible situation. And we get ourselves in these, you know, binds, and you just have to finish the job, you know, and so it didn't matter if it's 10 o'clock at night, you have to finish the job because the show opens tomorrow, and what are you going to do? But it was a time that we tried to look at what we had and what we could pull together. We didn't create, you know, a whole new topic just for cable. We utilized the program we were already doing. We drew the artists in, we got them involved in discussions, and the studio team got involved, and they were there. We were all working together on it. So,
No, I mean, it's really, you know, my last question was kind of about, you know, why LBMA, you know, but looking kind of through our discussion, realizing that's a very serendipitous thing that happened where you all came together and created this very special platform. Because, you know, because what you're saying, Anna, like, this wasn't LA, you know, this was Long Beach, and it's very special where MoCA or LACMA could have had a facility, but they didn't because they had all of you very special individuals doing
we did
this
it
with
because
passion.
we could do it.
Yeah, you could do it, and you were passionate about it. Like
Yeah.
you said, it was the commitment to the artist and the support of the artist. So thank you. You know, it's really amazing.
Well, Long Beach was really like the hub
Yeah.
of an international movement in the early days. It was the only place. It was the, you know, the capital.
Yeah.
Really,
Mm-hmm.
everything. You know, everybody in Europe knew about LBMA.
Right. Yeah.
And as soon as we got the tri-standard equipment, they started coming. And we started making we couldn't afford exhibitions with everybody, but we did screenings, and we let them stay on our sofas, and, you know,
Yeah.
that's how we did it in those days.
Right.
And also this production studio itself became an archive. I mean, every work that was edited and produced there, the studio retained a copy. So
Well, and many artists left copies
Yeah.
because they knew curators came to look at work, and
Yeah. That's amazing.
that's all now at the Getty Research Institute.
Yeah.
So it's a study collection.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to open it up for questions. We're just about at 4 o'clock. So does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Fran?
So seeing all of the monitors together, I think is really fascinating because all of the stylistic differences seem to jump out. And I wondered if anybody could speak about, like, you know, cable access as being maybe having an idea about documentary, you know, thinking about the difference between fiction or personas, how people took on different personas in the different medium. How do any of you think about these stylistic differences that seem to show up so dramatically?
I'll address that first. I kind of equate in a certain way the cable access possibilities with early FM radio in the 60s in New York where I was growing up, because early FM radio was really pirate. And if anybody here is from New York or knew what was going on, it was by any standards beyond outrageous of the kind of things that people were getting away with and actually doing on the air. And this is what I grew up with as an adolescent. And sort of in the same way, when you're seeing stylistic differences, as opportunities became available through the museum and then through the kind of public access that I was involved with equipment, it basically was open to anybody to come in with any ideas that they had that weren't constricted by corporations or businesses or structures that limited on what you could say and what you could do and have it go out to the public. And I can especially say that without giving specifics, in New York in the 80s at the time, if anyone tuned in to a public access television after midnight, your eyeballs would fall out. And so I sort of see that as an opportunity for why there were so many radically different kinds of things that were going on. I mean, I could say at the same time that Nancy was doing work with Howard Zinn? Michael Zinn. In the same studio, we had a Baptist minister coming in doing his weekly shows. And everything in between.
Well, and the interesting thing was that people from the different programs would crew for each other. So we had people working on our show that did their own shows that were radically different from Michael's. And they might have had a different political perspective, but they had to set that aside and just be part of the crew.
Wow. I have a question for you, Stuart. That's a very good question, because what is essentially a documentary medium, you all took to your work, in particular, thinking of Seven Prophecies. How do you get from what is essentially a documentary, these examples of your work here, to something that is so romantic, for lack of a better word? That's that medium is the message. If the medium was documentary, how do you?
Well, to speak to that, because of my involvement with the museum, and I may be in a unique position, up into from 1980 all through the 90s, I've seen every videotape that came through the museum. We're talking, 5,000 videos? And I worked with some of the most prominent video artists on the planet during those years. So I kind of almost feel as if I was a product of not a university training, but of a schooling that came directly out of the Long Beach Museum. And pardon? And because of that, I can say, like, the piece you're talking about, which was here in 1990, that was really instigated because a year before, in '89, Bill Viola did an installation I went up to see in San Francisco and Kira. I've forgotten the name of the installation where he built the forest with the woman giving birth. I'm sorry? Sanctuary. And I spent 3 hours walking through this massive installation, and which just absolutely amazed me if you know Bill's work at all. He built an entire forest in a gallery. And then had this monitor of a woman giving birth in the center of it. And I spent 3 hours by myself looking through it. I'm not exaggerating, 3 hours, realizing that this inspired me to the next level of the kind of video work that I wanted to do. And so there was a real evolution over the years between the earliest tape that I made and what came after.
I think the variety of styles and aesthetics that are part of this cable series demonstrates the diversity of possibilities that this medium offered. I mean, there's many other forms that aren't on view here. They're very personal, discussions directly with the camera. I'm thinking of people like Vito Acconci, who just address the camera directly and, for an hour. And which was in the first cable series, by the way. And when we took it to Santa Barbara, they said, "This is not art." Anyway, and it really is, this is a kind of, video becomes part of the activity. I mean, everybody knew the video was there, and everybody was acting to the camera, and it was a lot of, brought the level up, I think, to have a video camera there, and everybody knew that it would be recorded. When you go into that far room, as Masaki pointed out, he says, "Oh, this is the art room," where the artists are talking about their work, and there's some theory, and there's some discussion about what the medium of television and journalism, how the media was controlled, and these things were often analyzed by artists, and I think it's a really important part of one aspect of how video operated. The other would be just how they would use it in a more emotional and aesthetic way. But there's many different varieties that are on view, and I like that. It was always something unexpected.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk now and for your work over the years. I'm thinking about both the collaboration that you talked about before and about the location of Long Beach Museum of Art. And I'm curious, I'm thinking about the production studio that you had here. And I'm curious if there were other models that you used to build that, or if you saw your production studio serve as a model for other museums to build other sort of laboratories or other sorts of studios, maybe more educational rather than technical, but kind of if that was kind of a model that could be reproduced or that you used to build yours. And with that, I'm also thinking about the specific location of Long Beach Museum of Art. As Anna mentioned, Long Beach is not LA, but I cannot stop thinking about the proximity with Hollywood and the amount of equipment, for instance, that would allow to circulate, at least in the area. And I'm curious to see if there's any sort of relationship between that location and the museum.
I always said that we were located between Disneyland and Hollywood. The Golden Triangle. And quite often, producers from, say, NBC would phone up and say, "Well, will you send us a dozen videos? We'd like to review some artists." We'd say, "No, I'm sorry. You can send somebody down and you can look at our screening room." "Oh, we can't come to Long Beach." So, well, then, sorry about that. Remember, during these years, there wasn't the same amount of traffic on the freeways. You could easily get from Long Beach to downtown LA in 20 minutes. Frequently, it wasn't the same. So we could go, people would travel here, and everybody's, "Okay, we're making the ride to Long Beach." And because we always had refreshments, and we tried to make people feel at home when they came here for openings or something.
Kathy, I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to bring this up about Long Beach. There was a show by the photographer, was Robert Frank? When I first landed in Long Beach, and I came to Long Beach because my car broke down here. And I came, originally from New York. The only museums I knew were the museums in New York City that I grew up with. And I came I was in Long Beach. My brother lived here where my car broke down. So I went into the Long Beach Museum, this place I'd never heard of, didn't know Long Beach from anything. I was on my way to San Francisco at the time. And I walked into this show on Robert Frank, and it beat out anything that I'd ever seen in New York. I'm still getting goosebumps just talking about it. I was floored at this place that I really didn't know about was doing some of the most sophisticated, advanced, brilliant programming that I had ever seen. And so just to give you a sense, there was maybe because of this location, there was an opportunity to do things like this that you could not have done in other museums or facilities like that.
Probably you're right. I often ask artists in Eastern European countries in the 80s how they got away with doing some of the things they did, and they said nobody paid any attention to us. We weren't important. so they could do whatever they wanted. And in some sense, we weren't in this, we were not part of this elite museum environment. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't even aware of it. I was really a hometown girl at, went to Cal State Long Beach and just did my internship here. And, I wasn't part of a big, fancy Bard College curatorial program. So it was, it was learning by the seat of our pants, and it was respecting artists, and it was attending to artist needs. There was no other situation like this anywhere. Now later, I understand the Walker Arts Center did develop an artist studio, and they did commissions and things in the Walker Arts Center was in, where is it?
Minneapolis.
Minneapolis, right. It's cold there. And many museums commissioned work, but there were no studio facilities for artists. They might have had transfer capabilities, where they could make copies or something like that, but not really a studio with full freedom. Yeah.
I also think one important component of why it was able to grow in the way that it did was because until 1985, the city of Long Beach, like the Parks Department, ran the museum. So there was no real administrative oversight like there might be at places like LACMA or other major art museums, where the sort of later, and sort of plotted it along kind of as you wanted to,
Actually, during At Home, the director here left, and the city was in some kind of another crisis of some sort. And so in order to, and it was still under city management, the Long Beach Museum was a city department. And so they put it under the library, actually, and that's how I actually got a job, is because I had worked for the public library as the staff artist there. I, drew the butterflies reading books and, made the book displays and stuff like that. And so I got just transferred over here. And when the museum director left, they went, oh, the city librarian at first became the head of the museum, and she recognized she didn't know what was going on. And they appointed this guy from Parks and Recreations, Greg Devereaux, to come in. And he was enthusiastic. He wanted to learn, and he said, "Yeah, go for it. This is fun." And so, he wore the sheriff's badge when we did the Halloween event for At Home. He was right there, like, yay.
So fantastic.
So, it comes with some benefits when they don't know what's going on.
Any other questions? Yes.
Kind of looking at today's media art scene, what do you think has come through from the community that you're describing from the 1980s? What has been lost?
Well, well, first of all, we all of us as a group at that time looked at the same monitor. Now everybody has their own screen that they look at. Very few people are looking communally at a screen. I mean, occasionally we do have exhibitions where that happens, but in general, I think it's more isolated. I think there are groups of digital artists that form teams and things like this. I know more of the European side because I left and went and lived in Europe for 23 years than I do what happened here in the digital scene, but it was much more, I think, an independent operation with one person and maybe a studio of artists. But video required a lot of people. It was heavy, you needed all this stuff, and you had a couple of cars full of gear, and you had to go someplace. Somebody had to go get the sandwiches, and somebody had to watch the gear. It was a lot of fun, but it was a lot of work, and it took people. And I think with the programming and that, for me, it's more isolated. But that was my experience.
I think there's a few places that still carry on in that spirit. One is Media Burn in Chicago that has programs with video artists. They just did a program with Susan Mogul. They also do more contemporary works. There's also a place where you can process your own video. And it used to be in upstate New York, and now it's located in Colorado.
Stuart? Yeah.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking about it. It's the difference between 40 some odd years ago and now is the difference between airplane flight in the 1920s and SSTs. I mean, we're living in a completely different environment, in a completely different world. When I talk about hole in space, I wish I could remember the name of it. Very recently, if you might know of it, there was this recreation of that concept, but it looked like a giant Oreo. I don't remember which two cities it was between. But what happened is they had to close it down after day one because people were doing obscene things to each other in this space that didn't even conceive of when Hole in Space was done. And so they had to shut it down. Then they had to put it back up with advisories or monitoring or something. But the point kind of being like, who cares? I mean, it would be like, looking at the airplanes that Saint-Exupéry was flying over the Andes in 1930 to deliver mail, and UPS. I mean, we're just living in a very different planet and different environment. I will say, though, that Long Beach as a creative entity, along with the Long Beach Museum in this particular era, was amazing. If anyone knows the history of what was going on experimentally, I'm thinking specifically of what the Long Beach Opera was doing at the time, which was also world class and not being done experimentally anywhere else at all. It was a great time. I mean, I feel incredibly privileged to have been part of it at that time.
Places attracting certain energy at certain times, and looking around at the world and how things are going. I think Long Beach was one of those magnets for this kind of energy at that time. And I mean, there was no reason for it to be here other than the people who came together and the energy among them, and that the artists were able to come together. And otherwise, it could have been anywhere, but it was here. And it had to end at a certain point, and people often, they were calling out to me like, why did it end? Why did it end? It's never one reason. First of all, the city of Long Beach wanted their building back where our video studio was. They decided they were going to reopen a police precinct. So, oops. What do we do with all this stuff? It had to get thrown into storage. I wasn't here at the time. I had to find all this out. That's the first thing. The second thing is by this time, artists had desktop editing. It was much easier for them to do this digitally. Many artists had created their own individual studios at home or in their own studios. And third reason is that the museum here had started a project to build this building. And they put all their programs on hold, and all energy went to building this new building. And so those three things, just some storage facility until they got saved by the Getty, by by Glenn Phillips. So people are starting to leave, so we should wind it up.
No. But no, it's perfect. Thank you for wrapping up the reason why it kind of it ended. But I mean, yeah, kind of just all these different things led to its end. But luckily now it lives at the GRI and people can visit it and they make appointments and it's really fantastic.
And many things are online.
Yes,
you can
many
see
things, yeah.
many of the works online.
Yeah. So, anyways, I want to thank everybody for being here today, and especially want to thank all four of you for being here. It's been really an honor to speak with you and hear your insight. So, thank you so much. Appreciate it. The show will be up until February 2nd, so please feel free to come back. There's a lot to see, and so please make multiple trips to come see everything because it's a lot to digest. But we're really thankful for everything you all contributed to this series and to the video program. So, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.